Welcome back to another episode of Adventures in Machine Learning. I'm one of your hosts, Michael Burke, and I do data engineering and machine learning at Databricks. I'm joined by my amazing co-host,
Ben Wilson. I write SDK proposals for open source projects at Databricks.
Today, we don't have anyone else. It's just us, a panelist episode, and we're very excited about it. At least I am. I know Ben is as well, and you should be too. And here's why. Today's topic is how to deal with ignorant people. This might be a little bit cathartic for at least me. I've been dealing with very kind, lovely, talented, and amazing people who might not know one thing that poses a bit of a challenge, specifically to me and my work. But of course, everybody at Databricks is perfect. So we came up with a few case studies that we thought would be interesting to cover. The first is, how do you enter into a greenfield project with a team that might not have expertise on the project? And there are a few angles. We can take the consultant angle, where you're actually placed into that team to help or to lead. We also want to talk about if you're a member of that team and you're given a really tough proposal where no one on the team has expertise. So Ben, what are your thoughts?
Having lived in both worlds at this current company, and at previous jobs as well, from the consulting or teaching aspect, where you're brought in to work with a group of people that have no context on some directive that's come down, like, hey, you guys deal with data, you analyze stuff, figure out how to predict the future, and then everybody's just like, you have different personalities in a group like that, or at least from my experience, I've seen there's the overly ambitious, generally a younger person who's like, I can do this. I'll look up on Medium and I'll get a blog post and I'll just, copy some code and make it work. Not knowing that, hey, that tutorial that is shown is ultra high level on highly curated data. And in order to reduce somebody's propensity to navigate away from that, they leave out all the complexity that actually is involved in that, so as not to overwhelm a reader. And then you'll have somebody in the group that's probably set in their ways. They know what they know and are unwilling to try to push themselves to learn something that's very foreign to them. And then the rest of the group is probably, from my experience of dealing with groups like this, and having been on teams like this, everybody else is either just checked out, are terribly afraid of this concept of what they're about to be tasked with, or just completely ambivalent. They're like, okay, another project. All right, I'll do whatever you tell me to do.
Got it. So a lot of different thoughts there. Let's start with in the team component. One of the key takeaways is don't use Medium as your primary source of information. Let's go into a case study, I guess. So I recently have been doing a lot of scoping for ML stuff, and actually I've had multiple projects that involved putting Gen AI into a place where it potentially didn't belong. One of them was time series forecasting. And actually I had two that were time series forecasting. And so I would pose the question to you, Ben, if someone says, hey, there's this cool thing called transformers. It's fundamentally sort of autoregressive. It maps relationships between sequential pieces of information. It should work perfectly for time series, right? And because of that, and because ChatGPT is super cool, shouldn't we build a transformer-based time series architecture? So let's say that is the logic of your esteemed boss, and you are part of this team. What is your approach to either building it or not building it?
I mean, my approach, just to be very clear up front, my current leadership chain would never, ever ask something like that. Never. Not even joking would they ever say something like that. One reason is it's a ridiculous question. to ask to somebody who's going to be potentially designing and building something. The second thing is nobody in our management would ever tell a senior technical person implementation details. They would present a business problem and then leave it up to the nerds, us, to figure out how to solve that problem. And we would come with a proposal that they would review to make sure that we're thinking through the business problem correctly. And then we would do technical design, which they would also look at and pose a bunch of intelligent questions that could be just them playing devil's advocate to make sure that we can defend our position. And then once everybody agrees, then we go and build it. And they don't care how we build it. They just want the business problem solved. I'd say that is an example of highly effective technical management. And that's sort of the gold standard, in my opinion, of how organizations should operate for technical solutions to problems. But setting that aside, if we're in bizarro land and my manager actually asked me to have the team do that, my first thing would be to take them aside into a private one-on-one meeting and ask a lot of questions of like, why are we doing this? Why do you think that that's the technical direction we should go down? And why are you trying to tell me how to build something? Because that's weird. But after that conversation, if it was very much a just go and do as you're told, I would probably update my resume. But I would go out and I would ask myself a bunch of questions that are part of things that I need to check boxes in my own head to figure out if this proposal is the right way to go. One of those things is actually searching Medium, because if there are posts out there where people are touting that this actually works, then maybe there's something to it. That doesn't mean, hey, this is legit and I should do this. It's okay. It seems like there's a lot of people talking about this, and I'll search other places too, like look for references. And I'm scanning through that stuff not to look at their code or look at how they built it. I don't care. I'm looking to see what libraries they're using, and I'm writing those down. And then I'm going to those libraries or whatever they're referencing and looking to see how many times these examples from the people that created the library are out there. So if it's buried in some like obscure location in their docs, or it's in their repo in some like experimental example thing, I'm like, all right, this wasn't built to solve this problem. Maybe somebody's just has figured out a way to kind of make this work. That's a red flag for me. Or maybe it's the library is designed 100% for this particular task. And if that's the case, I want to see where it comes from. So a good tip for people out there, when you're looking through an open source repository in the initial README, if you can find a reference to the white paper that's in like before the fold of the README, is it in the first page? And is it highly like very visible or at the like within the actual description of the project? This is based on the implementation of this paper. That's a huge red flag for me, because if that's what you're using to kind of market what you've built, this project is probably coming out of a PhD program or like somebody's dissertation, which means generally it's not production ready. Because if it is production ready, they're going to create a new version of that'll have the white paper in the footnotes where it belongs at the very bottom of a README or notification of like what this thing is, not as the advertising aspect of it. Because if it's for production and you want people to use it, you're going to state what the tool does and what its features are and how to get started with it. Not this is based off of my paper. It's kind of scary when you see that. I'd also be looking at other usages of it. So yeah, you can look at stars, you can look at downloads of like open source trackers and stuff. And then you can also look for examples of its use just in general online. Are there tons of people using this? how many instances of this are in publicly accessible GitHub repos? Are those serious repos? Do they come from a big tech company, or is it like somebody's pet project that they're just monkeying around with? So you want to try to determine evidence of other people using this approach. If you can't find any, then go back and figure out, like, what do people use to solve this problem? Is it written down in a book somewhere? Can I get that book? Can I read it? Is it something that has well-established patterns of how people solve this problem? If so, go research that and figure that out and see what is most commonly used. Look at the law of averages. If most people are using some approach to solve this problem, it's lower risk for you to, follow the herd.
Yeah, I did a lot of this work at my prior role where we would go and read a bunch of white papers and try to basically innovate in the space. But innovating without a baseline is really, really hard. And so often we would just implement things that larger, more research oriented organizations, like I think our examples were Airbnb, Netflix, Booking.com has really good experimentation, Google, and then a little bit of Meta, and leverage those implementations in our own work to solve our own problems. And then we would tweak it a little bit as needed. But that's a really high ROI solution. And often tech blogs for these companies, they're really great sources as well. And a lot of them are on Medium. So I completely agree. So
yeah, what you don't want to do is find a non-tech adjacent company with some tech organization blog referencing this implementation, and then nobody else references it. But I've seen that. I don't know how many dozens of times working with people. I'm like, where did you find this? And they're like, oh, this cool blog post from this company. Like, that's a startup that has like 10 employees, and they just happen to hire the person whose PhD was based on this tech. So yeah, they're using it because this person was the one that was hired. So they're using something they already knew. It doesn't mean it's any good. And maybe that library is just full of problems. So it won't even work on your data. So yeah, it's risky.
Right. Now, what if you are not part of this team and you're coming in as an external consultant? And let's assume you're generally benevolent and you're not hated and it's a normal working environment.
I would not modify. And in the past, I never did modify that approach, where I just start asking why and try to backpedal from, instead of talking about implementation details and like how we're going to solve this problem, just start asking, like, what are we trying to do here? What problem are we solving? And once we get that all nailed down, then we start thinking about ways to solve it, but not just gravitating towards this one thing. Like, oh, our CEO said that we need to use Gen AI. Like, cool. And how does that relate to this business problem? What is the problem? Well, our CEO said that we need to use Gen AI to do forecasting. Like, that's an implementation detail put into a business problem. Like, that, they have nothing to do with one another. If you want to get it out there that you're using Gen AI for something, use Gen AI for something that it's really good at and it's proven, to lower your own risk.
I'm curious, what's your MVP Gen AI project? Because I've gotten this question at least 50 times. Like, what we need to use Gen AI, what should we do? What's the answer?
Oh, intelligent information retrieval. It's the number one thing that I think is a huge selling point for businesses to use Gen AI. Like, we use it.
An internal chatbot type of thing, or?
Yeah, if you want something that you can build in a week and get into production in another week, provided that you have the budget for it, find the best LLM you can for whatever your budget is. Get a good vector search engine. Index the heck out of all of your internal documents that don't have sensitive information, and then hook those up together in an agentic framework, and then deploy it. Make sure that you can handle request volumes, and make sure that it's thoroughly tested. And if you can do that in 2 weeks with a, relatively small engineering team, and you're going to get massive ROI for 2 weeks of effort, the amount of time you're going to save your organization with it. I don't think people understand how many times during the day so many people just need to get information about how something works, or all of the docs that a company that has been around for more than a couple of years are going to have available, and being able to index all of those and actually have contextual question answering capabilities is completely game changing for any organization. And it's going to be cheap. Like you're going to get 100 requests an hour, maybe 500. It's not going to be like, oh, I need this like massive deployment that I have to maintain. And it provides value from day one too.
Right. Okay, cool. That's my answer as well. But going back to this scenario of the Greenfield team, so you come in and you're an external consultant, and you do all this sort of do a lit review, essentially figure out what's been done, what can be done. How do you then convey that information in an effective way to that team?
Statistics work pretty well in my experience. So it's hard to argue with data. So you can do it with spending an hour or two and collecting the information that we just talked about. Like, hey, you want to do this thing. Here's how many references that seem legit that I found. I time box it to 30-minute search, set a timer. Be like 30 minutes, me and Google working through, trying to figure out how many good references I can find in 30 minutes. And then I take 30 minutes to do the next alternative to that. And that the results of those, and that's something you can also pass on to people that you're talking to. Be like, hey, if you don't believe the way I did this or my methodology, here's what I did. You go and do it and see if we come up with something that's kind of similar. Usually when you are trying to convey this topic of like, should we use this tech for this thing? And you go through that process, most people are going to come back to the table the next day and be like, yeah, you're right. Okay, let's explore these other things.
Right. Okay, so prototypes with North Star metrics, essentially.
Not so much building a prototype, just like researching
POCs.
how many.
Okay.
Just researching how many people are talking about these things. Like, can you find legitimate references of like, are people saying they're using this tech to solve this problem? Can you find it? And then just when you find one that seems legit, paste the link and put a green box next to it. When you find something that's nonsense, paste the link, red box next to it. Count up the green boxes as a ratio of total boxes.
Heard.
Say like, hey, I got 3%, catch rate on this idea, versus option 2 has 90%.
Right.
Which one should we go with?
Clear. All right. So that covers, I think, the team aspect. Now, what if after all of this hard work, you've spent a reasonable amount of time trying to build prototypes, do your lit review, try to see if other people are solving this problem with a certain piece of tech, and you conclude that this is just a terrible idea? How do you go back to your boss and say this is a terrible idea?
Let the data decide. Show your findings of those ratios, and then explain what the risk would be. And start breaking it down from a high level estimate of how much work is involved in approaching these different alternatives. And that's what a tech lead is supposed to do when they're evaluating this stuff, is like, I estimate option 1 is going to take, 10 person weeks to get something that'll be at a prototype phase. Option 2 is 2 person weeks. And then to get a prototype going, you break all of that down, and then you start assigning pros and cons, like risks associated with things. Like, hey, option 1 that you wanted us to do, super risky. We don't know if it's going to work. Now, there's plenty of time when you're at, or plenty of times that this happens, when you're at a company and you have something that's already working, and you want to do like greenfield research, like test out, like, hey, is this like, could we potentially use Gen AI to do this? It's fine to do stuff like that. Like, just go and prove it out. But that's a spike, right? That's like you time box amount of effort and R&D time if you have the budget for that and you have a bunch of free time to devote to this. Take one person who can do that methodology that you trust and have them work on it for 2 weeks or something. And at the end of that, they provide a report of what their findings are. For this particular use case, the report is probably going to look pretty dismal because it's not really designed for that. But have people kind of made it work on highly curated data sets that they have like handcrafted? Oh yeah, people got to get those papers published. Are they peer reviewed? Do people do big tech companies pick this up and start doing it and then start talking about it? No, because it's nonsense. But you'll know after 2 weeks, like, yeah, this, like, we spent 2 weeks, we learned some stuff. We have some examples. We learned more about Gen AI capabilities. We have all these like API examples that we can use for other projects. Like, it's valuable time spent, and you have a report at the end that can be used for the next person who comes up with this idea to be like, yeah, we already looked at that, and no, it doesn't work.
Yeah, I can definitely echo this. With Databricks, we professional services were given statements of work or SOWs, and often customers want to deviate from the SOW. Maybe some requirements in the business have changed, or they see a shiny new feature that they want. And it's a real challenge because we have a fixed budget of the number of hours we can actually be putting into this project. So a really good way to push back against that is just say, we have this fixed amount of time. What do you want us to remove from the SOW to incorporate this new feature? And likewise with a boss, we have a fixed amount of time per times number of employees times number of weeks for this sprint, let's say, or whatever it might be to get this done. What do you want us to remove? And even if it's like, there's oftentimes this spillover as well, where like it might not even be able to be done in a slightly reasonable amount of time. And then it's a no-brainer. So providing work estimates as the baseline or like the unit of ROI, by definition, that is the investment, the I in ROI. But it's really, really effective for decision makers because then they can do a simple calculus of, is this worth 10 weeks of 5 people's time? Yes, no.
Mm-hmm.
Big fan. Cool. So we've done team, we've done boss. Let's do super boss. So you have a politically charged situation, and going along the theme of ignorance, let's say someone else on a different team doesn't know what your team does per se, and they vetoed something that you really need to get pushed out. So how do you circumnavigate that via going up a few chains of management and influencing them to override your other team's decision?
So the important thing about influencing organizational change. So if you're calling, big mom or big dad, let's just call that like C-level suite, the people who can just assign a directive and people will do what they just said because that's like company vision. I can tell you the worst way to go about it is complaining. If you just whine about the fact that I can't get this done because this person said no. I mean, if you go to C-suite with something like that, they're probably going to tell you to shut up in no uncertain terms. You're not going to get the result that you want because nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to hear somebody just you just have created a problem for somebody who doesn't have time to solve that problem. Now they need context. They have to do a bunch of, chats with, multiple parties. They have to waste a bunch of their time in order to figure this out and then make a decision. So you're creating multiple problems for yourself when you do that. First one is you're not going to get a quick answer. Second of all, you're going to look like you're helpless. And thirdly, you're going to annoy people up the chain of command because you involved somebody who's now going to be like, what's wrong with your team? Because whether you know it or not, your manager is going to hear from their manager, who's going to hear from that C-level person. But like, why is this now a problem? Why are you not managing this correctly? Like, why didn't they go to you to solve this? So you can't do something like that and have it play out well. What you can do is when you present an issue, don't even mention that somebody doesn't want you doing what you're doing. You propose multiple solutions with pros and cons with both, or come up with an idea that simplifies something that, in order for that to work, requires this other thing to work, or this thing that you're requesting to be in existence. And you send it out publicly and make it very benign, very not so much benign, but very positive in nature. Like, hey, we'd like to do this initiative which solves all of these problems. Here's some alternatives as well. And be very honest. Like, you better not make stuff up when you're doing that. Just present the facts, but you give options there, and the option that you want to happen, and it's got to be something that's valuable as well. But when you make that presentation, make it so that it's almost common sense to go with that. And the honesty aspect is super important with this, because if you're not being honest and haven't done the presentation of ideas that makes this so compelling, people are going to look right through it and be like, yeah, you didn't do your homework, you didn't think about this other aspect. So it has to actually be a good idea. But if you present it in a way where you're giving these different options and then presenting it focused on the problem that you're trying to solve and how it's going to, impact the company or impact your part of the organization, you're probably going to get your way if you present it in that way. So even if there is resistance and somebody chimes in and says, to this email thread or something, and they say, no, we don't want to do that, this isn't the right way, like this goes in the face of our team's directive and we can't support this, they now are becoming that one, like, negative complainer in this thread. And an executive is going to look at what the original proposal is and see like, oh, this seems reasonable. Why is this person complaining so hard about this thing and being very negative about this proposal? It seems like it's a good idea. Just go and do that. So that's one way to just sort of solve that problem for you it's a very public way of doing it, but you can do it in a way that, because usually that person who's very negative is going to come back and be like, yeah, we'll work on this with your team. And then you be very gracious to them and say, thanks, we're really excited to work on this together. And everybody wins. So that's my take on that. So taking this back to the Gen AI time series thing, the way that I would handle that in that exact scenario, if it is the CEO who's requesting this and demanding that we use Gen AI to solve time series forecasting, my response would be the presentation of the options to solve the time series thing that have nothing to do, like maybe Gen AI is one of the proposals there, but then put some other proposals, like, we have this thing running right now, it works fairly well, here's its results, and here's a snapshot of its latest run and how well it's performing. And then here's option 2, which is improving the existing by using maybe another algorithm. I did a prototype and here's what the projection looks like. That we have like 4% increase in accuracy or whatever it is. And then option 3 is the thing that was proposed. Like, we're going to use Gen AI and here's the results of that. And we estimate that this is going to take this amount of time. And then after that, like, we're addressing the business problem, potential solutions or avenues of action, and then break apart that whole that tight coupling of business problem and implementation directive into, being able to read through read between the lines with the problem. It's like, okay, the CEO wants to use Gen AI, wants to say that they're using Gen AI because that's a marketing ploy right now. So they want to seem relevant. Well, create another section below that proposal on solving the original business problem on how can we effectively leverage Gen AI in our business, and come up with 5 separate proposals for that, but are business focused. Like, here's product related things that we could use this for. And that might be you having a brainstorming meeting with the team or talking with other people in other departments. Like, think, play some jazz, think outside the box, think like how you could leverage this, and then codify those as distinct projects of how to use this technology.
How do you determine what the executive cares about? Just asking them?
I mean, if this one's pretty obvious, like if they're saying we need to use Gen AI to solve our forecasting problem, they went to a conference somewhere, somebody was talking about leveraging Gen AI for unique use cases and how amazing it was. They don't have the technical acumen to know that that other person talking is completely full of BS. So they just come back to the company after their little chat and they're like, we need to do this too because our competitor's doing it. It's like, first of all, no, they're not, or not successfully. And second of all, okay, you want bragging rights about using new tech so that you seem, like one of the cool kids. Let's do that and see how long it's going to take.
Got it.
Sometimes it's a little more nuanced, but anytime I hear we need to solve this problem using this, this particular tech, and it comes from somebody who is not in tech, I'm very skeptical.
Cool. Yeah, I really don't have a ton of stuff to add because I haven't done this much. I always come in as the external person at Databricks, and at my prior role, I was pretty low level, so I implemented a lot of really cool and really technical things, but I never was a thought leader. And now, again, in the Databricks role, you can just be like, that's dumb. Why are you doing this? And they will usually listen. And if they don't, you phrase it a little differently, and then they start listening. But that makes a lot of sense. Is influencing bosses the best way to get someone on a different team to do something you want?
Definitely not. And you should only do that if you understand all parties involved. You know these people personally, and you understand, and you're at a level where you can actually initiate that conversation without stepping on the toes of your own management chain.
Got it.
So you have to have some, like, be in a position where people trust you, and you can't just be like some random, hey, I'm a junior engineer and I've got this great idea. I think our company's going in the wrong direction. Have a chat with some people first, like run it up the chain. Most of the people that are above you are going to have years, if not decades, more experience, and they can help guide that conversation with you.
Cool.
That's the best way to do it. And I think the most effective way of getting something done is you always notify your management chain before initiating something like that, and having conversations with them. They're like, hey, this is what I'm planning on doing, or do you think this is the right move? Or, hey, can you interface with your counterpart on that side? Let's come to an agreement. The lower level within a corporate hierarchy that you solve a problem, the faster you're going to get a resolution, the happier everybody's going to be. And, it's just going to be a better experience all around. But it depends on who it is on the other side who's going to be throwing a wrench in your plans. Like, hey, this person's going to block our ability to do this. Well, that's when you're like, all right, what level in my chain could override this person? And you realize that nobody can except for C-suite. And that's when you have to come up with creative ways to do that.
Got it. All right. One more question on the executive front. So I am currently trying to get an initiative at Databricks approved. And I think keeping it anonymous is the best move right now, but it's hopefully going to be very public. We'll see. It's probably not going to work. Let's be clear. But it's something that I'm really passionate about and I enjoy. And what I would need to have happen is people all the way up to C-suite, essentially, maybe a level below, maybe, but probably C-suite, approve field engineers spending less time on customer work and spending time on another initiative. In that scenario, this is just for like my personal vision, and also I think it benefits a lot of people involved. I've created a list of the people that are benefiting, and literally every party is benefiting except for the fact that we have less time to devote to customer work. So in that scenario, what are your thoughts? Like, how would you go about approaching influencing executives for your own personal mission? And let's be clear, I'm also very low on the food chain in this discussion.
Yeah, it's that's going to be a tough one. And when you're talking about capitalism, right? So it's directly impacting the business. If you're talking about human hours spent solving something that could be making money. So if you're taking away from that,
you need to replace the value with something else.
You need to replace the value with something that is significantly higher than what would that amount of human hours would normally be doing.
And significantly higher is because you need to warrant changing inertia.
Yeah, I mean, it would be a whole new sort of company project that would need sponsorship from the C-suite, and you would basically need to create like a business plan of what is this thing. So basically, like a startup pitch. Like, hey, this is my vision. This is how it's going to impact. This is all of my data associated with this. If I was to estimate the amount of work involved in proposing something like that, 6 months at least to like get that formulated in a way that that pitch would be even considered. And then the benefits have to outweigh doing nothing by a very large margin. It can't just be like, well, we have this ephemeral metric that we're going to use to like gauge how beneficial this is. It's like, no, it's got to be like, what appeals to the business. Are we going to cause customers to use more of our product so that we make more money and increase the value of the company? Or is this going to give us such positive publicity that not doing it is a risk?
Got it.
And if you can't prove both of those conclusively, like to a point where nobody can, it's in like an ironclad case that you're presenting, then it's holes will be poked into the discussion. And if you can't plug those holes fast enough, it'll go nowhere.
Heard. Okay, so we've talked about teammates, whether you're internal or external. We've talked about bosses, and we've talked about bosses' bosses. What do you do when you have a teammate that is ignorant about something that they have already built? So let's say the time series thing, we go and we build a great implementation. It works, but it's just worse than a cheap PMD ARIMA model. How do you go about persuading them that A, maybe they should drop the project, B, this is costing money? Like, what would you say to them, and how would you try to influence the behavior?
I mean, this is purely theoretical because that would never happen on the team I'm on now. Nobody would even build something that they don't understand. They would probably refuse to do it, and rightfully so. Or they just have a lot of questions like, what are you, like, why are you allowing me to do this? But in a hypothetical situation, and I have worked in teams like this where somebody takes on a project, or they're doing it like on the weekends, and then they come and do a presentation as a big surprise. Like, oh, I worked on this for the past 6 weekends, and here's this thing that I'm going to do. Sometimes I'm like, my first reaction is a very much a WTF moment. Like, what are you doing? Like, why did you spend your weekends working on this? I won't do that publicly. I won't humiliate the person, but I'll have some very pointed questions for them one-on-one. Very much who asked you to do this, or why did you think that this was something that the company needed to do, and why would you waste your weekend working on this? Like, why didn't you come up with a proposal and then we could all evaluate it and get it as part of your like sprint plan? Like, what are you doing? Are you trying to, like, inmates run the asylum approach here? Like, oh, I'm gonna do a mic drop moment and everybody's gonna praise you and they're gonna say, oh yeah, we need to pivot to this, because that's not going to happen. That's not how we do business. So I would dress them down and let them know how pissed off I was about that approach, because it's not useful and it's not good for the rest of the team. Nobody else was involved in evaluating what they were building on their own. So you're trying to have a hero moment of like, oh, everybody, look at how cool and smart I am. I figured this out. Nobody cares. And we have, hackathons for stuff like this, where it's time boxed to like, hey, you got 24 hours or 48 hours to work on this thing. That's the time to do that, and then present your idea. So if somebody built something that I know is garbage and then was presenting it in such a way that they think it solves all of these amazing problems and it's the right thing to do, uh, I would first look at myself to be like, how did I fail as a team lead? So this person didn't know that this is unacceptable. And then secondly, I would look at them and say, why did you think this was the right way to do this? We have processes in place that have been proven out over decades in this industry that we've co-opted to run our organization. Why are you going against all of that wisdom? And if they continue to still just be like, well, it's a good idea, like, okay, now let's break it down. And before we go any further with this, we're going to have the whole team test this thing out and we're going to poke holes in it. And we'll see, like, is this actually great? Did you get lucky? But I also want to see a design on this. I want to see how what your idea of how this works is, and let's discuss. So it's a recipe for them getting a mountain of work being dumped on them now that they did this, and they now have to defend their position.
Have you ever seen people successfully defend and then there's some product adoption, or it's like, oh, actually you were right?
Oh yeah, I mean, like from hackathons, stuff like that happens all the time.
Not from a hackathon where initially people are frustrated by the implementation or disagree with it, and then opinions are swayed.
Depends on how they do it. If they come up with a proposal and get permission to spend some amount of time during working hours and go through the process of, here's my proposal, here's my design, here's my prototype, please review it. I'm going to file some PRs in draft phase. Everybody poke holes in it. If you're including the entire team in that process, or whoever else from other parts of the organization need to do that, of course, that happens all the time in our current group. Somebody has an idea, they run with it, but they follow the process that we know is going to result in the best possible implementation for maintainability, extensibility, and it's set up to be successful. The cavalier come in, try to do the mic drop moment of my solution is better than what the team has built. Does it happen? Sure. Are you going to piss off the whole team and make them feel like they're not good enough to work with you? Yeah. And that hasn't happened at Databricks for me. Definitely not. But it has happened at prior companies that I've been at where I've been a team lead. I've fired people for that, for this exact thing. And it's not because their implementation was bad. Sometimes you look through the code and you're like, yeah, you're right. However, the whole team hates you now and nobody wants to work with you anymore. You've basically become a pariah because you've excluded, you basically, by doing this, you let the team know in no uncertain words that you think they're a bunch of idiots because they can't be involved in this process. So you are no longer welcome here. That's my solution to stuff like that. You don't need a hero when you're building solutions. Other people need to maintain it. They need to be involved in that. I mean, like we hire people for a reason on a team so that all of these other opposing views and the sheer mental power of a group of people always outweighs one person's genius or their perceived genius.
Right.
It's super toxic, in my opinion, for people to do stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I don't know that I've seen a lot of really bad internal and publicly facing implementations. I've built a couple of them, and I don't know that it has a detrimental effect from what I've seen, but I can see how on a non-consulting based organization, or if you do specific things within the consulting space, like step on another team's toes, um, then it can lead to problems. But oftentimes, like these one-off things just don't get adoption. Like I remember I built a one-click TPC-DS benchmarking tool that would load test against a warehouse based on this industry accepted set of queries that is representative of what analysts actually write. So it was pretty robust and fundamentally sound. I had worked with a few other people that had built similar components, and I sort of stitched them together. But it also came from a Databricks SQL SME, or subject matter expert group. And so it wasn't just out of nowhere overnight. I had originally built a similar thing for a customer, and then I workshopped it and got general approval. And there's been another iteration on it that actually works, I think, well. I haven't used it yet, but yeah, mine just no one used it. It was interesting to see. So that's often what I think what would happen if you just build out of the blue on your like weekend or whatever it might be. But sometimes you do step on toes, or sometimes you say the wrong things to the wrong teams, and that's when it can become dangerous.
There's a huge difference between building something in isolation that is a tool. So I would equate something like that to somebody on the team building like a bash script that helps to automate something that we do every day. If somebody did that, the whole team, if it's good, the whole team is like, sweet, this is awesome, thanks. I would be too. I'd be like, this is great. Like, thanks for doing this. It's a huge difference between that and, hey, I just filed this massive PR that redoes the entire functionality of a core part of our product in complete isolation. And it's not like compellingly well done, or there's no documentation associated with what the design was or the process to be followed. Somebody drops like a 30,000 line PR and it's not tracked anywhere. Nobody's looked at it. That's grounds for like, what are you doing? Like, why would you waste this amount of time? No, we're not merging that. This has to like break that thing up into 12 different PRs and let's go through the process of what we do. And if you have so much time to do this, why aren't you working on the other very pressing things that we need to work on? So like nobody in engineering at Databricks would do something like that. Like that would never happen
Right.
because we don't hire people who do things like that.
Right. Cool. Final category of person. Let's say there's a junior person. They can be a direct report. They can just be someone working on your project, and they are ignorant about stuff. How do you go about teaching?
Same way we kind of bring people in this the scope of what we do now within the team, which is never underestimate the amazing capability of failure to instruct. So everybody needs to feel that, I think. Like you need to feel overwhelmed. You need to feel like you're underwater. You have no idea what you're doing. And you need to break stuff and then go and fix it and learn how the thing works and why you didn't do it right the first time. It's a very important and almost cathartic process of getting better at something technical. The way that can blow up in your face as somebody who's giving the tasks for that person is you give them something that is far beyond their capabilities. So there's a metered approach to it. So as you want somebody to grow into a role when they're new to the organization or new to your team, You start giving them things that are adjacent to what their current understanding and capabilities are, but just hard enough that you know they're going to struggle a bit. It'll force them to ask questions, and there's a benefit there. They're going to get to know their teammates on a technical level. They're going to figure out like who knows a lot about this thing and who's giving me the best tips and advice. You're going to get an exposure for them of understanding what the review process is like who's going to be pointing out things in minute detail that is going to help you get better. But the task that you're giving them is not something that's so complex or has a huge blast radius. So you're not going to be like, hey, like on week one of somebody new coming to the team being like, yeah, we got this project where we got to create like 5 new REST APIs and the entire interface to the back end. It's going to take about 3-person weeks, maybe 4-person weeks. New person, this is yours. They now have to learn an entire tech stack. They have to like reverse engineer how other ones are built now. They need a bunch of like tribal knowledge about how the company manages all of this stuff, like what our versioning strategy is, how do we do docs for this stuff. Like there's so much stuff to learn in a project like that there's no way they're going to get it done on time. So you're setting them up for not just frustrating failure, but ultimate failure. Like they're going to be so stressed out. They're not going to retain anything. They're just going to try to tactically get through this as best they can. And the review process is probably going to be traumatic for them because there's probably going to be more comments than there are lines of code from like experienced team members. And you're also going to lower everybody's perception of that person because they're set up for such dramatic failure. People are going to start wondering like, who is this idiot that we hired? And as the person who gave that task, you just set them up for failure to basically look like a complete clown. And that's just immoral. So the key is give them like a small enough project where they can knock out a couple of quick wins with a little bit of resistance. So they're slowly learning more and more. And over time, you start giving those bigger and bigger projects that are just outside their capability or their level of knowledge about how this stuff works. And then you're working with them to be able to give them the answers they need after they hit that insurmountable roadblock where they're like, okay, I don't understand what's going on here. And then you jump in and you're like, okay, here's what you need to do next. And they're like, oh yeah, I wasted like a half an hour trying to figure this out. And yeah, okay, now I get it. That's how you build a team member's knowledge for like a technical perspective. When you're talking about the green field, like team member comes in who doesn't know anything about the principles of data science work or ML engineering. You have to gauge what they know. And hopefully you did that during the interview process to know where their baseline is, where they're coming from. So what do you need to build up on their foundation level of understanding so that they can be successful to do the first couple of like smaller projects? So the ramp up time can be much longer, in my experience, for a data scientist than it is for software engineering.
Heard. A lot of thoughts. One thing that I struggle with. So I've been fortunate enough to lead a bunch of projects in the past like year and a half or whatever it might be. And now I've like leveled up a little bit where I'm teaching people how to lead projects and at least trying to. I don't know if it's going well, but it's a really interesting paradigm. And I think the hardest part for me is quickly assessing skills. And I'm going to iterate on that. I like the idea of doing an interview, even if it's not for a professional interview, if it's some way to calibrate, because then you know how to start like guiding, and then doing the personality analysis of like how much out of their comfort zone do you want them to be, how much out of the comfort zone do they enjoy being, what are the types of tasks that they like, what are the types of tasks that they don't like, what are the things that they need to get better at in terms of process, not just like output. Those are all, I think, a lot easier if you have the baseline. If you don't have the baseline, you're sort of shooting in the dark. So, Ben, what's the most efficient way you gather that baseline?
For software engineering, it's just like, hey, show me your last 10 PRs.
Okay.
Like you can read.
What about a new hire?
You can read from a PR history. Like you can look at the first commit. You can see what the state of the code is. You can look at the comments, see how they respond to them, and look at the final state of the code. And you can generally tell like how somebody's, like what their strengths are, like what they really understand, and things that they might need to work on. Because that's the comments, like people that are saying, hey, this isn't, like, let's not do this, let's do this instead. But a lot of that stuff, like everybody starts from a very similar baseline where like how I work now. Generally, we're not hiring people that have like that are struggling to understand like basics of software engineering. Everybody knows that stuff really well and the concepts involved. And there's not a lot of that like ramp up like that. It's more, what does it seem like this person really enjoys? And that's through one-on-one discussions. Like ask them about, hey, how did you feel about like your last sprint, or like this last quarter? What did you enjoy most? And they'll start telling you like, oh, I really liked working on this project, what they've worked on that they really enjoyed. And then like find those adjacent projects that
Right.
gonna be something that they can really sink their effort into and feel like they enjoyed the process of doing that. And that's all about retention, because when you have good people, you want to make them work on stuff that they want to work on. And the team that I'm on right now, we have amazing people. So it's more like it's almost playing defensive with them with regards to projects, because everybody on the team can do anything that we work on and do it exceptionally well. It's more like, what's going to make like them smile at the end of the week when they get this PR merged and this project done. And that's the goal, is like match people up with that. Like what are they most passionate about, so that they feel like, yeah, this job is awesome. Because we definitely do not want them going anywhere, because they are incredible.
Heard. Yeah, no, I completely agree. And it's fun to find things that people like and help them discover what they do and don't like. Because there's a lot of aspects to a job that you can pivot towards and you can specialize in. You don't always have to be the person for the thing. There's different ways to approach the same problem. Cool. I think we've covered it. Any other final closing thoughts?
I mean, I had a question for you about like the data science aspect, because you do this way more than I do now. Just like when you go into those teams at like a customer, and nobody there has ever built anything using like machine learning, but now they have a project like, hey, we need to use ML to solve this. What's your process for teaching them, or like just starting that?
The key thing is starting with where they are and then iterating. The way my brain works is I approach a lot of life like Bayesian optimization or like hyperparameter search. I remember I spent a lot of time on it a couple years ago, and the analogies that you can get from how those algorithms work, they're really applicable to life. And so it's exactly the same thing. You're just searching a space for a new location. The question is, how do you minimize the number of steps to get to that location? To do that, you need to know where you are, where that information is, and then how do you most effectively take a step. So if it's stochastic gradient descent, you leverage the derivative at your location to take a step down in loss. So with that, it's a really simple principle of first evaluate where they're at. The way you do that is go in and look at the code. Second is try to do some high level personality analysis. This is super hard. Typically cameras are off, or not typically, but sometimes cameras are off. You maybe don't have very frequent meetings, but if there's energy in the room, it's a lot easier and a lot more fun. And then from there, you say, all right, we're going to solve this business problem. I will review your stuff. And if you get unblocked or if you get blocked after, let's say, 3 attempts, I'll show you a prototype. But beyond that, just figure it out. And then finally, it's really helpful to create a high level design for them so they can fill in the pieces so that they don't just go off in a horrible direction. So I don't know. It's actually not that hard. I think it's pretty codified in my head now.
When you get from that position of, hey, we can build a prototype that we have a model that does something, how do you teach a team that that's the first step in 10,000 steps to get something that is like production grade for high use at a like at the companies that they esteem so much? It's like, hey, if you're deploying a model that does like optimization of content filtering on at Meta, that team, probably 20 people on it, and they've been iterating and improving on that model for over a decade. How do you steer them down the right path to be like, this is how like their principles are when working on stuff, and these are the things that they consider?
Mm, that's harder. So how do you sort of teach them to A, think from first principles, and B, know what the right ones are?
Hmm.
All right. So the right way to do this is create sandboxes where they make the mistake and learn it intuitively, as we were alluding to earlier.
Hmm.
That takes time. So I often just say it. And I often demonstrate first principle thinking. Like that's definitely one of my strengths is I can't really make sense of anything unless I understand the baselines and like the first principles, as I think we've alluded to. So when I'm in a call, I think I demonstrate that very evidently, and hopefully that's enough for them to see how to do that. But the correct answer is like spend a year with the team and like create little like playgrounds where they can say, all right, this is how I learn why modularity in code is important. I need to refactor this piece and swap or essentially like swap out this model with a different model. You want that to be modular. You don't want to have to rewrite your entire piece of code. And what you should do is if they don't have it modularly built, they should sort of feel the pain of bad code essentially. And that way they develop intuition around it. But again, that takes time. So I try to just say it and then demonstrate first principle thinking. What are your thoughts?
No, like the same stuff that I used to do to teach fundamentals of data science was do. I used to really like building hyperbolic examples, uh, and I'd always use like very simple models that would like train, and I could run validation in seconds. So create some dummy data set and make it so that it's mutable, and then set up a particular you know optimization library that would demonstrate the happy path of like, hey, we have this data set and I have ordinal values and continuous variables and I have some categorical in here and it's clean. Like it's been engineered for features so that like this is good. So it feels like something that they see in a demo in like sklearn. Like, oh, sklearn data set and the model does this and I can change this parameter and it increases its accuracy and it works. That's a pipe dream in the real world. You never get data sets like that. So I would emulate that sklearn data set with their data, like maybe spend an entire day just cleaning it and going through that painful process of like getting it so that it's in a good state. And then just take raw data from and train the model on that, on like the clean data. And then take their raw production data, like stuff that's come in over the last couple of hours that has no feature engineering done to it, no cleanup. Like it's just garbage, missing data, malformed data, whatever. And then show them, like iterate over each row of that data and show the result and then see the look on their face. And like, this is why feature engineering is important, why you need this pipeline to make sure that your model's not throwing exceptions with every other
Yeah.
row or has these issues. Like, hey, we have these, like in your raw data set that we started with that you showed me when I first showed up, you had these 18 columns that all have covariance associated with them. But there's a signal in this other column that is really important, but it's getting drowned out because these other 18 columns all track together with one another and the magnitude of their values dwarfs the changes in this other one. So this is why these parameters exist in this library. And here's what we have to do to clean this up. We pick the one that, most closely tracks what we have for some sort of correlation here with our predictor. And then this other data that we're also incorporating now is actually seen by this algorithm. It's not drowned out in noise.
That's
So
so
let's,
funny that you like doing this. I get so bored. Like I don't maybe I'm just I think part of it also is I feel young. So I feel like when I enter these rooms, I feel like I'm not qualified to like be teaching, so I don't really that's not like where I'm at in my career. Like I'm still at the I need to learn in my career.
uh,
Um so maybe it'll change at some point. But I have reached the point where it's like I don't care about the implementation. I just want it to work and I want to solve real problems. Um but it's so funny that like that sounds like pulling teeth to me. Like creating a notebook that like walks them through the conclusion they need to reach. Good God.
yeah, I mean, if you've done it 1,000 times, like built, like
Yeah.
I can't even tell you how many like decision trees models I've built over the years. So it doesn't take me long to do that. And it's also fun it's not fun writing that code. It's
Mhm.
it's very boring. It's very rote, but it's fun playing with it a little bit. Like, hey, how bad can I make this? Like, yeah, I can get it to throw exceptions like nobody's business. Like anybody can do that. But can I get it so that it's predicting something that I know they don't want it to predict? So I look at the data, I understand the business problem that they're trying to solve.
Negative
And it's
sales or
like,
something?
or like, can I get this like feedback loop going in a time series forecaster that's gonna cause an actual business problem for them? Like something they would panic about,
Mm,
like something completely irrelevant in their inventory. But can I get the model to say that the demand on this is going up by tens of thousands of percent week over week? But not just like this weird exponential flaw in the model itself. Like that's easily filtered out. Can I get it so that I can manipulate the data and simulate what could go wrong with their original implementation just by putting the right synthetic data in there? Like, here's what can happen if you're not controlling this, or you're not using the right algorithm, or you just use the defaults and you didn't bother to learn all of the
yeah.
aspects of this library. Here's why this thing is important. Let me show you. And I'll show them the data. And at first they're looking at it and they're like, yeah, seems legit. Okay. Like, all right, let's see what the model does with this. And you show them and they're like, uh, that's saying we're going to sell 1.5 million popsicles 6 weeks from now. Oh, if this model went out to our purchasing department and they weren't looking at it, like, yeah, that could cause a big problem for us. Like, yeah, who's going to get blamed? Purchasing department or the data science department? Yeah. So you only get one mess up like that in production. If you
Well,
get
okay,
two, they're never going to use it again.
not to like beat this to death. What about and let's take the consulting example. If it's your own team, it's a lot easier. But why do you find where's the empathy come from? Like, why are you invested in them learning these things? I feel like it's also like partly your nature, but what's the angle? Can you explain it?
I don't know. Uh, it pains me to see people doing things in the dark, and
Mm,
I really enjoy like my own personality. Like I really like epiphany moments that I get where I'm like, oh, finally understand this thing, and it's expanding my understanding of this concept. And it's, I don't know, like a huge dopamine hit for me. I love
Mm,
that like revelation that happens. And I haven't encountered too many people who are actually paying attention and actually care about what they're doing in their career that don't like that. Like most
mm,
people like that element of surprise and understanding and that epiphany moment because it excites them, right? Like we're biologically programmed to like we'll respond to that brain chemical. It's something that drives us as a species.
right.
Like I've discovered something. Other people have discovered this before, but for me, this is my first time discovering it, and it makes most people feel like really invested in what they're doing because now it's personal. So being able to impart that to other people and ignite that in them, when you go back and check with those people, maybe a year, 2, 3 years later, they're fundamentally changed for the better in their
Yeah.
practitioner status. Like they're just better at what they do. They're thinking differently. They're thinking more efficiently. They're building better things. And for us as a whole species, the more people that are building better things in more responsible and effective means, the better we are off as a species, in my opinion. So why not pass that on?
That's an interesting angle. Yeah, I think I agree. I did a 4-month check-in with a customer I used to work with, and I basically trashed a lot of their practices in a like constructive way. Um, but they were also doing great things, to be clear. And now they've like adopted a lot of them, and their development cycle is just so much faster, and they're so excited.
Yeah.
They're just enjoying their jobs a lot more. So,
Yeah.
um,
That's literally, that's the only thing I miss about the field,
hmm.
about what I was doing was that experience
Literally the only
of
thing.
like, you know, being able to go back and talk with a group. The thing that made me smile the most, and only it happened a couple of times, where I go back and talk to a customer like 6 months or a year later after my last engagement with them, and they show me something on the screen, and it is beyond me to understand what they've done. And and then I start asking questions like, "Oh, how does this work?" Or "What did you guys do here?" And they explain it like they're explaining it to a 5-year-old, which is what I taught them. Like, hey, if you're interacting with somebody who just needs to get the TLDR, just explain the core components and then let their brains fill in the gaps.
Yeah.
And they do that exact technique. And I'm like, yeah, all right, this is awesome. Great work. Now let me see the tests. And then they just drive right to it. And they're like, here's all our tests. And you look at it. And you're like, yeah, this is, this is good. Like
Yeah.
you built something amazing here. You should be proud of it. And it's not for me to be like, oh yeah, back pat. Yeah, I totally righted this sinking ship. It's more just like, this is so cool seeing people grow.
Mhm.
I don't think it is like, oh, I helped do this. It's more like they did this to themselves. They opened themselves up to listen to somebody who's suffered through the inefficient way of doing this. So all I was
Mhm.
doing was just telling them things that I've done stupidly in the past or just have learned the hard way. And they were able to short circuit all that and just get to a better place. So I'm just really, I would always just feel happy for them. And they all just seem so engaged, like a whole team. Even the people that originally were checked out or
Mhm.
were very frustrated, they have this new mode of operation, and everybody's just excited about the next thing and also about improving what's existing.
Right.
Like the people that are excited to maintain what they built. It's like, this is pretty cool.
Yeah, I think I feel that a lot from my internal team. With customers, it's sometimes harder because you don't see them again often. Uh,
Yeah.
but sometimes you do.
Mhm.
Okay, we are this this has been a concise and efficient episode per usual. I will summarize. So, basically we went through 5 scenarios of discussing how to manage ignorant people, whether it be a team, uh, a junior person, a boss, a super boss, or someone that's adjacent to you that has built an abomination. Some things that stood out to me, at least: business leadership should propose business problems to their senior technical leadership. They should not define implementation. That's where the handoff from executive in the business world goes to executive in the tech world, or TL. When doing greenfield things, it's really good to start with a lit review and see if other people are solving the same problem with a given piece of tech, and then just sort of audit what is the trend in the markets. Clarify the problem, period. Ensure you're solving the right thing. When convincing a boss, provide estimates of work required. They often do this ROI calculation of, will the return in X amount of hours of work be worth it? So that's a scale that you can leverage, where you say the amount of work is really high or really low. Obviously, be honest, but you can take different angles. And always leverage research spikes to create POCs to make those estimates more accurate. And then if you want to influence executives / via executives, complaining makes someone look bad. So whether it's you or whether you get someone else to complain, it will make that person look bad. And always try to find a happy medium where everybody wins. So, Ben, anything else?
No, good summary as always. It's a fun one.
Yeah, it was. All right. Until next time, it's been Michael and my co-host,
Ben Wilson.
And have a good day, everyone.
We'll catch you next time.